Welcome back to Brighter Morning. This is Bo Tiwari, your host on Brighter Morning on MCTV and U97.5 Hot Like Pepper Multicultural Radio and Multicultural TV. We have His Grace, the Archbishop of Port of Spain, the Reverend Charles Jason Gordon, and we ask His Grace to please come online now and we'll have a conversation. Your Grace, how are you?
I'm doing very well. What about you?
I'm doing good, and I want to say how grateful I am that you agreed to this conversation. And I know that we'll have a good conversation. You are an enlightened leader of the church, and you are big on social issues. And I think on that basis, given the experience of COVID, we can have a good conversation. So I want to thank you so much for being here this morning.
My pleasure.
Okay. Now, the church has had this experience of COVID, and with the experience of COVID, not just closure of the church, but the needs of large numbers of people in this society who have been affected by lockdowns, by loss of jobs, by being in very difficult circumstances. Can you share with us, Your Grace, what has been happening, what the church has been doing, how the church has been feeling about this?
You know, the last 18 months, 19 months or so have been really, I would say, breathtaking.
Yes.
So we've locked the society down 3 times, for 3 months, and the last one for 4 months and a little bit. And each time we lock down, it does something to the psyche of our people. It's, think of the child at home in a very small family or with no other siblings. Think of the mother trying to work with a small child. Think of the disruption to the teenagers not able to socialize. Think of the breadwinners who were living a very decent life before last year, March, and with COVID now have no jobs, no incomes. And for the first time, they're finding themselves needing assistance to get by on a daily basis. These are fairly traumatic experiences in the life of many, many people in our country, and I would dare say throughout the world. But these traumatic experiences have really brought people to places that they had not imagined themselves being. The high level of depression, attempts at suicide, the whole darkness that people have been living in internally for a long, long time, the disconnection that people have felt. Now, as church, we have had to deal with all of this, and not only the spiritual needs, the emotional needs through phone conversations and phone counseling and online platforms, and keeping people going through our services, our masses, our Bible studies, and all the things that we did. And in one sense, COVID helped us to ramp up and to reach so many more people because of the needs that people have had. We've also done a lot of feeding of people. I know last year in the 3 months that were most critical, we fed 70,000 people through all of our parishes, and then like Living Water would have been another 20-something, 30,000.
Yes, they've been very active.
So, you're talking a massive amount of people that we've reached. This year we've done a similar thing. In our height, we're feeding 25,000 people a month. So this is ongoing for us as church. It's been a very difficult time for so many people, and those who have really need to have gratitude in their heart for what they have, because so many have come out of COVID not having, and I think we have to see that that's the kind of society we're now living in, and people who were living a decent life and autonomous are now finding themselves on a fringe and on a needs that they don't know how to support themselves going forward.
Yeah, I like the way you presented what you presented, because you talked about, I mean, the loss that COVID has brought to human beings in terms of their economic condition. But you also talked about the physical needs, the basic things of food, hunger, food on the table, etc. But you also talked about the psychological and spiritual needs of people. And I think in a fundamental way, what COVID has done is that it has, I mean, the level of stress that it has brought on people, when you couple that physical need and that sense of loss and alienation in the society from the economic benefits of society, together with the psychological trauma that it causes, I mean, that has been a kind of amazing experience for people. I mean, and even if you yourself are not experiencing it, when you engage people and you live it with them, it does something to you psychologically as well. So, Your Grace, it must have affected you as head of the church like that, feeding 70,000 people, having to reach out to people every month. How does that make you feel in this situation?
You know, COVID has been interesting in that respect. I think the first day, the Monday after we locked everything down, I woke up and I did mass, and after that I realized, but wait, you are going to be alone for a period of time. No secretary, no help, no support, no nothing, nobody coming in. You're going to be here by yourself, and it was already frightening, interesting, dark moment. And by the end of that day, I kind of worked out how I was going to do this, and how I would make sure that I got the things I needed to keep going so that I can keep the church going. And once I got past that, within a day or two, I kind of settled myself down, and I asked, okay, what's the major task that I have to do in a time like this? And then I set about doing mass every morning, and doing my homily like a Sunday homily every single day for the first 90 days of lockdown, for the second 90 days of lockdown, for the last 130 days of lockdown. So I put myself asking what the needs of people are, and then set about to try and help people navigate the time. And so the mass became a touch point for many people who tuned in every morning, and that was kind of the touch point of gathering as a large community, knowing that many people were gathering at that time, but also feeding people through scripture and feeding people through the Eucharist, and helping people in a virtual world to connect and be nourished, to be able to do what they needed to do to move their life forward. And I would only say that it has been a time of incredible grace for my life. And I've received so much during the time. And for me, as difficult as it has been, is as graced as it has been for me in my life. And, you know, this, apart from that little moment, and maybe one or two other little moments that emerged for specific things of loss, I could say that it has been a time of grace in the midst of all the difficulty of finding the funding and finding the resources and helping the priests reach out in their parishes, and all the other things that we have been doing. It's really been a moment of grace for me.
I'm glad you used that word grace, and I'm going to ask you a question about it later, because it's an important word. How do you see, now that we are opening back, what is happening to the congregations, the various parishes, the churches, and what is happening to the church, that's to say the Catholic Church, as you open it back up and people move from virtual to maybe a combination, I suspect you have of virtual as well as actual physical congregations?
So, people are always cautious. Delta is around. We've heard of a couple of cases in the country. So people have to be cautious, and that's the only way that we're going to get through this properly. So we've opened up to the 25% of the congregation, and what we've found is a lot of caution in the first instance, in the first 2 weeks, and that's usual. It'll take us a month before people kind of start pushing back on coming. We've asked people to rotate. So if you come this week, give a place next week to someone. Don't just book up every mass and leave other people out. So we have asked, be conscious of the whole community. Come to mass during the week if you can't get into a weekend mass. So people have been good. People have been responding. People have come back out. Now, I know that over the next few weeks we will kind of get it all worked out properly. So we have a portal on our website where people can go and find masses, register, and then come. So we have all of that set up really well. So it's still early days. We've only had 2 weeks of opening back. And I think that people are settling in and will settle into this new regime.
Have people been vaccinating, or is there still a lot of hesitancy you find? I know that there's some hesitancy in the country, but among members of your congregation, what do you find? I know you've also been an advocate for vaccination. Like myself, I mean, I don't see a way out without vaccination. We have to vaccinate. Not a trouble, is that?
The vaccination question is I find it fascinating. It is fascinating. We were all vaccinated as children. Nobody asked a question about it, huh? But now the hesitancy is here. I think when you look at Brexit, you can see how social media turn people towards a resistance campaign. And resistance campaigns are far easier to mount than pro campaigns.
Yes, it's easy to be against something. Yeah.
Well, it hits the natural rebellion in everybody, in every one of us. And skepticism about big societies and big government, and skepticism about all kinds of things. It feeds on so much of the base instinct. We know that the 12 media platforms or 12 people on social media accounted for 65% of the anti-vax sentiment. Now, that alone tells you it's a campaign by a few people that have been extremely successful in spinning their tale of woe to a wide variety of people across national boundaries, internationally, and right here in Trinidad and Tobago. And so you have this very interesting phenomena. And I could imagine in 20 years' time, studies are going to be done on this, because this is the closest I've seen the world to Nazi Germany, where you can move people to a mob mentality in giving particular nuanced messaging, so that you have people moving in lockstep together in a campaign that is destructive to humanity ultimately. Because to not vaccinate means that we're going to have more deaths than we need to have. Yes. We already know that 98 point something % of the deaths are unvaccinated people. We know that. So we're going to have more people dying, but people forget that the last time we did this in the Spanish flu, we had 50 million people dying. And that's and the population of the world was so much smaller. So by percentage, that's a large percentage of people in the population of the world. People forget that. And why would we want to go for those numbers again? So you see in some countries like Jamaica, when it gets a little too real, people start turning up for vaccines. And then, so the whole social media and then people who have large followings have not been responsible in using their fame for the common good and for the good of civilization. They have not been responsible. And so in all of this, we have this new phenomena of an anti-campaign to vaccination, which is really an anti-campaign to keeping us safe. And the more people send me scientific proof of why vaccines are not good and why we should not promote it, is the more I realize how spurious the science has been. And those people are speaking about things that the scientists are telling me this is just nonsense.
Yeah. Well, it's a very, very difficult time. And I want to ask you something. I said I would talk to you about grace, but I'll leave that for a little bit. I want to ask you about faith. I've had a few religious leaders here over the last couple of weeks, and I've asked them the same question because it is a question that challenges me as an individual. And because of that, I want to ask it of people of faith. Has COVID, in your view, shaken the faith of people in your parishes, let's say, about faith in God, first of all? And what about faith in the church as something to hold on to in times of crisis? And, well, you already answered the psychological problem, but I want to ask you about young people. But address this issue of faith. Has COVID shaken the faith of people, or has it made people more in need of faith in this time of turbulence and uncertainty?
I would answer it in two ways also, because in one sense, I think people's faith has been shaken. But I would prefer to say that the veil has been torn and people have seen through a veneer that we have been living in, a shroud that we have been living in, that we have believed to be real, and realize how unreal it is. And that has brought us a sense of trauma, panic, and existential angst to many, many people. Because before March 2020, most people believed that their life would go untroubled for the next how many ever decades. And it will get better and better. The economy will get better and better. And even if people say again, worse, God is a Trinity and we will all get through this and we'll all be great. So I would say faith in the illusion has been shaken. And the illusion that we are the masters of our own destiny. The illusion that we are the ones who control the world. The illusion that we are the ones that have this thing all together, and with our science and our this and our that we're just so great that we have total control of our life, our family, our nation, our destiny. I think faith in that illusion has been shaken. The veil was torn, and people are looking through and seeing something that they were unprepared to see. That ultimately all of our lives are in the hands of God, and that ultimately we can't account for tomorrow or the day after. Ultimately, we have no say on so much that we thought we had full control over. And when people come face to face with that, there are many reactions that emerge. Depression and suicide is one of those reactions. So, and that's something that we really have to understand. And the other thing that we have to see is that, the other reaction to it is a recognition that this God who has been calling us, speaking to us, is more real than we thought. And I think that people have gone in both of these directions. I know people tell me, that COVID time has been a time of growing faith for them in significant ways. I mean, Catholics will tell me, I know things about my faith now that I never thought of before, and I'm a Catholic for the last 70 years, and new things have come that I've just never thought of before. So I'm having that reaction on the one hand, and on the other hand, I'm meeting many people who really, and I would say the other reaction is more a reaction of loss, that the stability of their life has been lost, and they don't know how to put it back together again. And that has been very, very troubling for some. And that's what I would call the existential itch, because they can't see past the collapse or past the opening of the veil to the fact that our life has never been secure. We have never had control. We never had a promise of anything beyond the breath that we're breathing right now. Never. But the illusion of it is what we have held on to in Western civilization. And that illusion has caused us to become more and more secular and less religious and devoted. And it is that illusion, I think, that has been trampled upon, has been revealed, and it is that illusion that people are wrestling with at this stage in their journey.
So the existential moment is characterized by, you might say, a loss of anchorage and an indelible sense now of the uncertainty of living from day to day. You think?
Yeah.
Yes. Right.
Yes.
Very, very good. Just a quick response to this. Do you think young people who, I would say, born in the technological age and living as they are, inundated with information like this and generally more skeptical, do you think they have been more affected by, let's say, people who are more anchored in religion and tradition and spirituality, perhaps?
I would say the fault line is not necessarily along the age line. So young people have different developmental needs.
Right.
They need to be with their peers. They need socialization. That's how the culture has set up their life at this stage. Take us back 200 years ago. Young people didn't have those needs. A young person at 12 or 13 started apprenticing with an older man. A girl became part and parcel of what her mother was doing. And this going out to lime and socialize was not part of life 200 years ago. So Western civilization has brought this up. The lack of that, or the loss of that, and that's why I'm saying that the real angst is in the loss. The loss of that socialization has been traumatic for many of our young people. But young people with faith, we've had, our youth ministry has reached out to a lot of young people over the COVID time. We've had awkward conversations. We've had forums for young people just to see what's happening in their life. And yes, it's difficult. It is very, very difficult. But faith allows us to see the difficulty as a portal into a new relationship with the divine. The person who has no faith, on the other hand, just has this black hole, and there's nothing beyond the black hole. So the black hole is either a portal to deeper relationship with the divine, or it is a chasm into nothingness. And that's the division and of people. And young and old, where it is just a vortex, a chasm into nothingness,
yes,
that has been very, very difficult for many people. Where it has been a portal to really rethinking, reimagining, and reframing the relationship with the divine, then it has been difficult, painful, but fruitful. St. John of the Cross, who is one of the mystics of our tradition, talks about the dark night of the soul. And the dark night is not a negative thing. It is, yes, it's the way of purgation, but it's also the way of illumination. And without going through the dark night, you can't come to a purer faith. And so the darkness itself becomes most meaningful when we see the darkness as a portal to new relationship with God, as opposed to a chasm into nothingness where we descend and don't know where we go after. And I think that's the way I will see the difference in people.
Well, thank you for that insight. I think it's very, very substantial. You think COVID will help us as a society to put the fragmentation and combativeness and confrontation that characterizes this society behind us? Do you think that maybe we are learning a lesson that this is futile? It's not that you don't have different views. It's not that you don't have contending opinions. It's not that you don't make your different point of view. It's not that you don't express that point of view and make it known, but you don't have to fight and go into combat and kill one another in a society in the way that we seem to want to proceed. I mean, you think COVID will have that positive effect? Will we learn anything?
Doctor, I want to say you are a wonderful optimist, and I love it. I love it. I love it.
I have a lot of hope and faith.
I know. I have hope, not optimism. Here's what I see. The fault lines have been broadened during COVID. So we bounced into COVID and went through an election in COVID. And you know that whenever this country goes through an election, the divisiveness along the race line
is heightened.
Becomes super, super sensitive and heightened. So in the midst of this trauma, we bounced through an election. And I don't know that we have recovered from it. And I think too much electioneering is still happening as opposed to national leadership. And that is, for me, one of the challenges that we have to face, that the election must have a time when it ends. And after that, leaders have to come together to lead a nation, especially when we have the kind of crisis that we're facing right now. So that would be one part of it. The second part of it is that the world internationally has gone to the kind of divisiveness that we have known in Trinidad and Tobago, and gone that way publicly. So we have an international push on us, which is the vax and the anti-vaxxer scenario that we're facing now. And the third part of it, we internationally have this cancel culture where if I disagree with you, I have to become a midnight robber. I can't just disagree with you. I had to mash up. I had to grind your bones to the dust and obliterate you as best I can and make sure nobody will ever even call your name again. Well, that's midnight robber, huh? And that has become such a center stage of our media culture and our social media culture that we have lost the basic art of conversation, the basic art of civility, and the basic art of being a human being. And it worries me very, very deeply. I think we have to go back to fundamentals of teaching civility. I could disagree with you and still respect you. I could disagree with your views and still see you as a person of worth and a person who has, stature and who brings something important to the table. But that's not the way we're going. Yeah. And this is not just Trinidad and Tobago. This is not international.
I think that is
we see it's going differently.
I think that is a severe loss in human relations and mutual respect. And I think it's global in nature, but it takes a particular kind of character here because of our culture. we're coming to the end, and I'm going to have to ask you to be sharp and pointed in your responses.
Okay.
But I didn't want to leave the discussion without talking about the Venezuelans here in Trinidad and Tobago. We have had tremendous problems in Venezuela there. I mean, that country is just about falling apart. They're trying to put it back together now. We've had thousands of people coming here. People say it's as much as 100. Some people say 1,000. Some people say for sure 40, 50,000. And the official figures are like, 18,000, 16,000 or something. Have we been good and reasonable and fair to the Venezuelans? And have we given them a chance, you think?
Trinidad has had a fluid border with Venezuela from before Columbus arrived.
That is correct.
And we've gone back and forth.
There. Yeah.
Yes, in both directions.
Yes.
In 1810, when Venezuela had problems, lots of Venezuelans came here. That's the cocoa pile that created the boom in the 1860s with cocoa. In the 1900s, we have had people leave here to go Venezuela. So we've had these fluid borders. This time has been different because of the number of people who have come. It's also been different because of the number of people who are pushed to the edge of poverty. And so what I would say is there's been a national scare that the resources that we need are going to be taken up for people who are coming, who are going to take from us what we absolutely need. Now, that fear translates sometimes into xenophobia, sometimes just into fear. But I would say the Venezuelans have been exploited. People have been made to work in conditions that are not human and that are not what we would have done if they were Trinidadians. So we've taken advantage of some. And others have been treated very well and have been able to integrate in and find jobs and they've worked harder than our citizens have worked, which has forced the workplace to ask harder questions about how Trinidadians are prepared to work if they want to keep the same jobs. So it's done many things. But then COVID came, and this challenge has been really, really tough.
COVID
because the results are stretched for everyone.
No, I think your response is sincere and realistic. We have just about 2 minutes, and I'm going to ask you a big question outside of Trinidad and Tobago for all of us. Everybody has seen all the inequalities that have come with COVID. It's become very glaring what is. And basically the world as we have been living in it has been laid bare, and we know that there's something wrong with it, and have to fix it. At the same time, you have a kind of situation as well in which COVID has prompted more authoritarian tendencies, dictatorial, etc. So that democracy itself might be, in a way, under threat. So you have the capitalist economic system being questioned, and you have democracy as we know it being challenged and questioned. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, because I know you're a man who thinks about these things in addition to all your spiritual considerations.
Plato famously said that democracy is the worst form of governance because it will go to an oligarchy no matter what you do. I think we've seen that Plato is right. That ultimately democracies have become oligarchies. In America, it's clear. The second thing is that late American capitalism has now come to its end. And something new is emerging. We can't quite see it as yet. But the American domination of the world, that phase is over. And the new phase is emerging. And China is becoming stronger and stronger every day. So a new reality is coming internationally. And that reality is not democratic. It's centrally controlled. So there is something that is emerging. But we know in Trinidad and Tobago, democracy has not worked. The first past the post system has been a disaster. because 50% of our people are unrepresented in whatever government is formed, regardless of which of the two parties win. So there's a need for something new to emerge. And I know that you were part of a constitutional reform many years ago, and I think that was a moment that we missed, where we didn't reform the constitution, because internationally and locally, poor people are being left out more and more, and marginalized more and more, and it's no longer the whole society that is being cared for. The rich are getting everything that they need, and we're creating divisions and fault lines now that are going to haunt us in years to come.
Yeah, you know, Amartya Sen, the Nobel Prize economist, wrote something recently in which he said that democracy, we learned from John Stuart Mill that democracy is about discussion, and that when that ceases, or when that begins to cease, you know you have a problem. And I think the democratic issue is tied to the economic issue. But Your Grace, I have to leave now because the time has come for us to end the program. But I wonder if I can commit you to come back on the program and let's have a discussion beyond Trinidad and Tobago about some of the issues in the world. I would be really grateful.
Of course.
All right. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you for coming here. I didn't get to ask you the question about grace, but I will ask you that question because it's an important question for me. Thank you so much. And to those of you who have been listening and watching, that was His Grace, the Archbishop of Port of Spain, Charles Jason Gordon. And we had a conversation with him about COVID, about Trinidad and Tobago, what's happening in the world. And we'll have another conversation with him because he's an enlightened individual. He has different points of view, not just on economics and politics, but on spiritual matters. And it's always good to hear from those people. And while I talk to economists and businessmen and other political people in the society, I want to keep these people as part of the conversation because it's important to know what these enlightened spiritual leaders are thinking and feeling and what they have to tell us. Thank you for watching.